Aloha, my name is Raul Velasco. We are here at the University of Hawaii, West Oahu, and today we have a opportunity to share with you and connect with you in talking with a leadership educator. As part of the Association of College Unions International, one of the communities of practice called the Leadership and Service Education, one of the features or one of the initiatives of this group, in which I'm a member of, looks to feature leadership educators um, across the universities and across the nation. And so, with us, I have a dear mentor with us who've been in the field of student affairs and student activity specifically for quite a number of time. And this it's a unique opportunity for me to kind of talk with him a little bit much more about being a leadership educator. And with us, we have Dr. Jan Javinar. So, Jan, welcome.
Aloha, thank you.
Thank you. And so part of this is a talk story piece about your role with leadership education. And so one of the first questions I have is tell me about the work that you do currently in your position.
Currently,
Currently.
okay.
And leadership education focused or not?
Yeah, yes, but not predominantly. And so it's more, I work for the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs now. And so I indirectly work with with leadership development, more in terms of staff, on the staff side of leadership development, less so than with students, which was the bulk of my career.
Great. So what did you notice the difference? Because it's interesting to pull from you get to work at leadership education development with students and now more so on the staff side.
Right.
What are some things that you're finding either similar or different?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot more similarities. And in fact, for me, leadership education is almost like student development theories. The flip side of student development is staff development. And so, whatever I've been using with leadership education applies both to students and staff. So, I find much more similarities in the content that needs to be taught. Maybe the only difference is sometimes the manner by which I teach it, the pedagogy used or the techniques used, etc. But the content's pretty much the same. It's equally important for both students or staff in terms of how to work better with others.
And so one of the key pieces that you mentioned is really the content. So I know there's so much content out there. If you wouldn't think off the top of your head, which one speaks to you
Sure.
that you can think of that you think is critical
Yeah.
for staff and students in terms of receiving leadership
Sure.
education?
I think the two that comes to mind is relational leadership theory and situational leadership theory. So relational leadership theory is really the notion that leadership is all about developing relationships with the folks you're dealing with in the group, less so than specific skills that you need to manage an organization. It's more how do you begin to develop sufficient trust and communication and all of that dynamics to move two or more people towards a common, hopefully a shared goal. That's relational theory. That's real focus on the development of relationships rather than on specific skills or tasks. The other one for me that I've been using for most of my life as a supervisor and slash manager slash leader is the whole idea of situational leadership. That is, there's a way a leader can adapt his or her behavior to what the employee, student, or staff needs at the moment related to a specific task to be done. And so I've used those two as sort of anchors on how I deal with students I advise or staff that I supervise.
And so, what are some of on the flip end thinking? What are some of the initial responses that you receive from either students or staff as they go through, and you say you vary in pedagogical formats in terms of students having connecting with the material and staff connecting with the
Sure.
material. What are some initial reactions that you get or learnings
Right,
that
right.
students or staff share with you?
Yeah. I think with students in particular that I found both at the previous campus I was at and now here is the whole idea of thinking of leadership as less about a position and more about interactions with others. I think they get surprised that when I teach the content, it's not so much these specific skills and abilities, but more about how do you watch a group of people interact and deal with each other in in advance of achieving a goal. Um, and so and it's primarily in a classroom where they earning credits. Part of that experience is they have to be part of an organization to apply these concepts. Whereas with staff, it's more on the job, and so it's really looking at the group as their work team or as their immediate direct reports, and how they interact with those direct reports in order to move the group towards a common goal. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think you did, and you actually alluded to the differences of where we have students who are taking the class, and then for staff, it is outside of the class. And so you kind of got to the next question I was going to ask: in what settings um, do you do these things? In which you answered, and so I think for me is what is a rewarding piece for you as you teach leadership education to both staff and students.
I think for me, it's always about, especially for students, it's the aha moments they get and you see in class where they get the idea that, gee, leadership is really about how I choose to interact with somebody else and what can I be aware of in that interaction. So when I always tell the story about when I go out, when I go with my wife, I love to go shopping at a mall because for me, shopping at a mall requires me to learn a skill called process observations. And that's one of the things I like to teach students in a class, that always being mindful of I'm part of a group, but yet that group has a life of its own. And how do you describe that life? And part of it is learning to process observe what they're doing, and being able to describe them using concepts that we get in leadership ed, whether it's communication method, decision making, how they're dealing with conflict, etc. And so for me, that it's that aha moment when they get it, like, this is what he's really trying to teach us. With staff, the fascinating part for me is when staff feel empowered to problem solve on their own with their group using these kinds of skills, and they're very mindful of how what they bring to the equation affects the dynamics of what's going on in the group. And just watching that makes me feel satisfied. Like, yeah, you got it.
Good. And then what is helpful in this conversation, actually you use and you shared a personal experience using a concept that you actually teaching students. What are some other concepts? You talked about relational and situational, and the process observation. Other things that you've adopted in your own, or implemented and applied in your own
Yeah.
practice
Sure.
or in your own life.
So let me go back to the notion of situational leadership, which is an old concept, really, but it's to me very foundational and seminal, and has informed how I deal in my supervisory leadership roles with people. And that is to look at a leader behavior as really the key to how to influence behavior in staff or students. And that is to take a look at what is the task that I'm asking an employee to do, and assessing what is my sense of their level of competence and confidence in doing that task. And depending on how that assessment's made, will help me as a leader tailor my behavior to what that employee or student needs to perform that task. So as an example, so say a staff member needs to run a meeting, and it's the first time they're running meetings. So part of it is gauging how much they know about running a meeting, what's their competence level, i.e., the level of knowledge they have about meetings, and then what's their level of confidence. So if their knowledge is high but their confidence is low, then for me as a leader, it's much more about supporting and coaching than it is about directing and telling. So that's how it informs me as the leader or supervisor of that person, what I need to give them, because that's what they need to perform that task.
And knowing, and like what you said, and knowing working with human beings, it's different for each individual.
Exactly, and it varies task to task. So while you may be adept at running meetings, you may be less adept at managing budgets. So these tasks change. So just because somebody's labeled high knowledge, low confidence, doesn't mean that's who they are in performing any task. In other tasks, they may be the opposite: low knowledge, high confidence kinds of things.
And so you and noticing and just hearing, noticing coming from a supervisory, it sounds like supervisory when working with staff. And so in terms of from that angle and also thinking about the role of that educator role with students in a credited class, what would you say for anyone who is interested or pursuing um, leadership education as a piece to, or as a leadership educator for that matter, both in accredited class or as a professional with supervisory responsibilities? What would you encourage them to do to grow their knowledge in leadership education
Sure.
or just in that field?
Yeah. So I'm constantly reading. To me, learning never stops. So I'm constantly looking at different books and publications and journal articles about leadership and what that means, because there's a whole range of what leadership means to a whole bunch of people. So I'm constantly reading the book I'm reading now, which is an older book now, but it's called Side by Side Leadership, that encourages people to shift from this top down, very conventional hierarchical ways of leading to more looking at how you collaborate, because in this 21st century, I mean, it really is about how you partner with others to get to the common goal, or hopefully the shared goal. So what I would encourage people to always stay open to learning other things. It may not be new, it may be retreaded, but it's still just keeping yourself open to notions and ideas, and just pulling, besides not being open to it, is taking a concept and trying to apply it. Because for me, the best theories and concepts are always those that can be applied. And if they can't be applied, then they're just good theories or theories and concepts and not useful in that sense. So for me, it's always about enlightened practice, i.e., your practice, what you do, is based on some theory, knowledge, concepts that you've read about, learned about, and stuff. So it's being open. And then the last thing, I think for me, it's always being mindful of who you are, your own biases, your own perspectives, hearing it, how it plays out in how you're interacting, and then seeing the reaction from folks that you're dealing with. But always being mindful of who you are and how who you are impacts what you're doing with the group, how you're doing it with the group, and how the group's responding, and then making adjustments all along the way, because people bringing their stuff to the equation as well.
Wow, that's good stuff. Good stuff for me as I'm hearing it and pursuing this route for myself, because I think making that connection, that leadership education, and appreciated that thought that leadership education in one sense is personal development or student development, or in this case professional staff development too. And just so finding that parallels as I navigate through this journey in higher education for myself, as an educator, teaching leadership courses, and then with some supervisory responsibilities, and for myself, what to consider, what to take note of. And as we wrap up with this quick, short talk story, any final thoughts in terms of that comes to mind when you think about leadership education in the 21st century?
Sure. Yeah. I think the bottom line is we live in groups, and society's organizing groups. So I think the better we can be at operating in groups, and the more mindful we can be about what's happening when you bring two people together, the more effective the group will be. And what I mean by effective is that they can achieve whatever purposes they're set out for, and that the leader, so-called leader, can sort of enable, facilitate, create the steps so that the group can move forward. And so to me, leadership education can always be here, because as long as we stay organizing groups and we're not living in caves by ourselves, we're going to need to learn how to work with each other.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, folks, friends and family, thank you for joining us and screening with us with this opportunity and starting off this Leadership Educator series with the Leadership and Service Education Community of Practice. Stay tuned for the next one. Thank you and aloha.
Aloha.